Hey, you've been called the man most hated by Australian child sex offenders. That's a pretty cool title.
I think
Are you proud of that?
I am. Conviction rate on these sorts of things at the moment is 0.003% from reporting until to finish. 1 in 3 girls and 1 in 5 boys have some form of abuse in their life. So talking about it actually gets people to understand that it's out there.
Andrew Carpenter, welcome to I Catch Killers.
Thank you for having me.
Well, I think the last time we were speaking was on the Predatory podcast that I did with Madeline West, and you raised some things there that I thought were fascinating, and that was in regards to accessing superannuations for people involved in child sexual abuse. And I was surprised because I've been in law enforcement for a long time, and it was just a novel idea, approaching it from a different way. So where did that come from?
My mother, of all people.
Yeah.
So my mum used to work in superannuation, and back in 2018, when the Liberals announced they were looking at doing that, my mum actually said, "Did you hear about this?" and had no idea. And so every time they had meetings, I think quarter, I'd ask if there's any update with it, and there was never. So in 2020, I thought, if no one's going to do it, I'll do it myself. But it's something that I've seen throughout years of representing survivors. I mean, I've been doing law for about 12 years now, and I just saw all the time that the common trend for people charged with this is they'll sell their house, spend all their money on legal bills to try and defend it, and then wave the white flag and say, got nothing, can't touch me, but then they've got $1 million in super, and they tend to rely upon the taxpayer to indemnify for their crimes for their survivors by, Centrelink, Medicare, victims of crime compensation, and the sentences they get were just manifestly inadequate. So there's only one way to deter this, and
going for the hip pocket. That in actually the way that fighting organised crime is not dissimilar now. Police are starting to see, law enforcement organisations are seeing that attack the hip pocket, so that person that's renowned as a gangster or the outlaw that's living in this luxury mansion, if you start taking away the assets, it starts to get very real.
that's the first thing that happened. You see any bikie or crime gang boss or anyone arrested, the first thing you see on the news is their M-Wagon and Ferrari getting taken off in a pickup truck. And with this sort of field, it's something that needs to be a deterrence. And you look at ASIC, for instance, they've effectively stopped prosecuting people and they issue massive fines now instead. And breach of director's duties are going down massively. And unfortunately, when people are getting suspended sentences, it's not really showing that it's an adequate punishment, and the survivors are standing there facing a life sentence. And
we need it as a deterrent too, don't we? It's punishment is one thing, but the offence has already happened, the damage has already been done. We need it as a deterrent. And I think if people are starting to look, okay, if I do this, I lose everything I've worked for my whole life, I can see that starting to factor into the process.
Yeah, and that's a big thing with this change, is that child abuse, it's the one crime that has no legal justification. You think if murder, or self-defense of myself, self-defense of another, drink driving, had to take my dog to the vet, there's never any legal justification you can make for abusing a child.
Yeah, I want to break that down, because that's something else that you raised when I was having the chat with you on Predatory, and it is I think it puts it in perspective. Sometimes people that if you don't fully understand the offence, you don't look at the nitty-gritty of it, and you don't understand where it's coming from. But you're quite right, like with children, there is no excuse for sexually abusing them. Hey, you've been called the man most hated by Australian child sex offenders. That's a pretty cool title.
I think
are you proud of that?
I am. Besides Dad, I think that's the best title that I love. And I think that's just a badge of honour. Like, I'm going to go to a trophy shop and get that made up.
Yeah.
It was. I don't think there's any higher title you can get when you're in this kind of field than being the man most hated by pedophiles. So
you should have it on a business card.
Actually, the day that article came out, I messaged my boss and said, "Can we put this on the website?" Because it was a nice nickname to have, and I guess it was recognition for the years of advocacy in this space that I've had to try and really make Australia a dangerous place for this sort of crime.
And I like that attitude, make Australia a dangerous place for sex offenders, child sex offenders. How did you find your interest in this area of advocacy?
Just by happenstance. I started at a law firm actually 3 months before I graduated. I got poached out of university, which was lucky, and probably when you're in the police as well, there's always files that no one wants to do, and you give them to the probationary constables or the lowest to do this. And the firm I was in at the time, they just handballed all these files around of people that have been abused. And I took it as, well, hang on, if no one else wants to do it, I might as well do it and do it well. And I just found that the stories of people that they needed someone to be their voice. They're suppressed by law. They can't talk about this, and I just really met someone that would need representation, and I just basically took it on and realised the level of damage this caused. And it's not just a keyword. She was really suffering a life sentence. She's never worked. She never will work. Never finished school, and started helping her, and then other people started using me for these sorts of crimes, and it just really spiraled out of from there.
Can you give us an example of the impact it has, like using a case study without naming names? Obviously, we can't, or specifics to identify the survivor of the sexual abuse. But give us a story of one specific example.
I won't go into graphic detail of it, but it was the worst one I've ever done, where she was adopted at 2.5 years old, and the abuse took place until she was 18. And she's got deformed wrists by being tied to the bed. She's had internal surgeries to fix everything like that. And because she was basically kept at home, she could never go to school. She's never had any friends, won't have a partner, never worked. And she was basically tortured her whole life. And I ran the trial. I told her off the bat, I said, look, and I told my clients this, there's two ways to run these matters. The one that makes me the most money, or one that makes you the most money. Yep. And I don't drag these on. I get straight to the point. And so I went to court, and we won. We took all the guy's assets, and it was just weird. Later on, after that matter, the offender actually called the matter on before the court, and thought, well, this is a bit weird. Why is he calling it on? And the judge was reading out all the graphic things he did to her, and his only question was, what's going to happen to my couch and TV at my house?
So it's total disconnect.
So I got a warrant of sale over the house, and the sheriff called me the next day. Oh, what do we do? Oh, is there a nice couch and TV there? Yeah, chuck it in the bin.
Yeah. Good.
So, but yeah, it's the impact on her is lifelong. Like, she can barely walk, and she's mid-40s now. And she took everything that he had, but her whole life, like, she would never trust anyone. Everyone she deals with, she always, is this person who's using me? But yeah, it's going from someone that would have been a normal functioning person in life to basically locked in a room their whole life, and the offender only got 7 years for that.
It doesn't seem to equate to the damage that's been done. I can't even imagine how you survive that. She must be a brave human being.
One of the strongest people I've ever met in my life,
Yeah.
and the fact that she's, come out of adversity like this and managed to face him, and that's the biggest thing that people.
That's huge. Like, I would imagine the type of manipulation, the physical abuse, but also the emotional and mental abuse, to come out and take this person on.
Yeah, and I mean, she ended up wearing a wire and got him to admit certain things, and that was one of the instances where people actually do get a conviction, because the conviction rate on these sorts of things at the moment is 0.003% from reporting until to finish. And
that's concerning, isn't it?
It's very concerning, and what I'm finding is police aren't wanting to run these because they're concerned about the time period. So the average time frame it takes to report these instances is 33 years. And so, I mean, you probably couldn't remember what happened on June 14, 1990.
Ask me what happened last week. I'd be struggling. Yeah. It makes it very difficult. Is there... You would have seen a lot of police briefs in these type of matters.
I do, but I'm telling people on the bat right now, don't even bother police. Just, if they've got assets, sue civilly, because what...
So civilly, and if we could explain that, so on the balance of probabilities, not beyond reasonable doubt. Can you just make that distinction?
Sure. So beyond reasonable doubt is you have to convince a court that something happened 100%, where in civil, it's a balance of probability, so something highly likely to occur. So I always use the example O.J. Simpson. O.J. Simpson, I mean, you watch the trial, it's clear as all daylight that he did it, but there was one prosecution witness that shot himself in the foot and lied, and the jury basically said, hey, we couldn't, his testimony clouded it. O.J. got sued for wrongful death, and the court found that he killed those people. So with the criminal standpoint, because of the poor conviction rate and individuals effectively having to run the gauntlet while the alleged perpetrator sits in silence and gets to enjoy everything, I just tell people, look, if the police aren't going to investigate it, just sue civilly, because that way they have to run the gauntlet, they have to give evidence, they have to be heard by a judge and avail themselves to cross-examination. And survivors should really run that gauntlet, where a lot of the time the criminal aspect actually triggers a lot of people instead of actually helps them. So, but yeah, there was a study a few years ago, it was the Victorian Law Reform Institute, which showed that every 1,000 reports, only 100 get police intervention, 6 get convicted and 3 get overturned on appeal. So every 1,000 reports, it's 3 people that get convicted.
It's hard to even comprehend those figures, but that's an interesting way of approaching it. That pursue civilly and go for the.
Because the hard thing is, if you're talking about something that happened 33 years ago, in the criminal sphere, what were you wearing that day? Don't know. What were you eating? Don't know. With the civil sphere, so it was summer, so you probably wore your school uniform. You would have no doubt woke up in pajamas, eat breakfast.
On the balance of probabilities.
Exactly.
I understand. From a policing point of view, they are difficult investigations, historical sexual assaults, because recollection, people's memory, that type of thing, it's very hard to gather the forensic physical evidence. Do you think police could improve the way they're investigated, even given the fact that they're difficult investigations? So I put that on the table first. My observations of it, and I never worked specifically in the field of sex crimes investigation, but I worked on cases relating to that. They are notoriously, sex crime squads are notoriously under-resourced across the police, and that's everyone wants more resources. But I noticed there that they had a lot of cases on. Each officer seems to have a lot of cases, so it's basically taking the report, speaking to the accused or the suspect, getting their version, and then putting it before the courts and letting the courts decide. Did you see any way police could improve the investigations?
I think the biggest way actually from the front end is actually get a social worker or a trained psychologist to actually sit in the police for the original statement or interview to actually guide the survivors through it, because obviously people that dealt with or are quite traumatised, going to a police station and sitting down in a room is quite triggering for them. But if there's something that's a lot more calming or there's a lot more support for them, instead of just, tell me how you were abused, instead of getting there in a different way, would be the best. But I think my experience at the moment is a lot of police officers, and especially the DPP, they're very reluctant to run these unless there's normally conviction. So what people will find is they'll go to a police station, make a report, the police will then interview the suspect, and if they don't make confession or their lawyer up, they simply say, sorry, we might have to file this because something happened 40 years ago.
And it comes down to that. I think the way to negate it, and it's interesting the figures that you say, 30 they report or victims, and I just clarify that. I noticed the terminology survivor of child sexual abuse rather than victims of sexual abuse. Is that something that we're trying to get across, that these are people that have survived? You haven't broken us?
Well, it depends on how people see it. So a lot of people say the survivor was someone like Madeline West. She still classifies she's a victim because she hasn't really got the closure of it yet. Once her offender obviously goes through his day in court, she might come out the other side and say, look, I'm a survivor now. But I mean, it's how someone presents. Like if someone comes forward and reports this, that is the strongest thing they could ever do, because they're basically letting go of the handcuffs of control that person's had over them. And most of the time the person is a person of influence in their life. Yeah. It's rarely ever the stranger issue. But I mean, some people want to refer to as being survivors, some as victims, but it really just depends how they come out the other side of it that will define them.
From a personal perspective. I think to help with from an investigation side of things, the earlier it is reported, the better, for obvious reasons. But it's creating that environment where people feel comfortable coming forward. And the offenders, by the very nature, they're manipulative and they pick on people that make it very hard, innocent children, to report. What's your thoughts on encouraging or creating an environment, a safe environment where people feel they can come out and talk about this?
That's one thing. It's this topic that I've started, or this super campaign that we'll talk about later.
Yep.
I've really been pushing this for years, and everyone keeps saying how taboo this subject is, and people don't want to talk about it. I mean, you look at men's mental health; no one talked about it until 10 years ago, and so it was quite a taboo subject. And this area is still quite taboo. People get very uncomfortable talking about it, but there was actually statistics released this morning that show 1 in 3 girls and 1 in 5 boys have some form of abuse in their life. So talking about it actually gets people to understand that it's out there. And if you've got a child, a grandchild, a niece, nephew, and so on, it's something you really need to be wary of, and actually make sure there's education around, and to let people know that if anyone touches you or anything happens, you need to come forward. Most of the people that I've dealt with that have reported as being minors, they come out after they learn it's sex ed. I think it's year 3 or 4.
Where they realise it is wrong.
Yeah, and they think, oh, that happened to me, that's not right. Where that's a level of education that started happening years ago, but a lot of people that were abused in the 60s, 70s, 80s, they're coming forward now and going, we've just buried this for years, and when they tend to go through life burying it, they don't want to bring it back up. But definitely getting on the front foot and showing there's a greater deterrence, and the abysmal conviction rate is something that's needed to actually warn people not to do this.
Yeah, and it has changed, or hopefully it's changing for the better. But you refer to the 70s and 80s, and I speak to people that were victims back then, and it literally was a taboo subject.
And back then it was, people would go to their doctor and they just say, look, don't go about it. Or I had one woman once that said that she was told by police officers, oh, you don't want to go forward with this, it'll ruin the family. It's like, no.
I just cringe when I hear that. Where does that come from? And seriously, the children have got to be the priority.
It has to be. I think a lot of people don't come forward because they still feel that this adult is big and strong and scary. And I mean, it's completely off topic, but I took my kid to soccer the other day, and we're at the oval that I used to play cricket in primary school. And back then, the oval, I thought it was 100 metres long, and literally I could throw a soccer ball underarm from the pitch into the boundary line. And people don't realise that when they grow up, their offender hasn't grown twice their size.
Yeah,
once
I see
people
what
grow
you're
up,
saying.
they go, oh, hang on, I can face this person now. That the big scary monster is not, a 6'4" adult anymore.
This person is not that scary.
Yeah, so you think when you're a kid, everything seems massive. Doors seem high, planes seem big, and cars seem big. And now when you're an adult, they don't seem that big anymore.
Yeah. Well, we've got to, and that was what we were trying to push, and you're a big part of it with the Predatory podcast, making sure people are comfortable talking about it. Like you say, men's mental health. Well, it was only a decade or so ago that no one would mention that a bloke's struggling or whatever. You're a bloke. You weren't meant to struggle. But if we can change the narrative and let people understand these are things that have got to be talked about. You see quite often with victims, they'll go to someone. There'll be a trusted member in the family or someone on the peripheral of the family or a close friend, and then when they report it to the person they should trust, let's just pick an example, report to the mother, oh, look, it will destroy the family, this person's a breadwinner, this, and
Exactly.
Do we really need that? Let's just keep a lid on it and just be wary, just stay away from Uncle such and such. That makes me cringe when I hear.
Oh, and the statistics are actually quite shocking. It's over 90% of abuse claims happened with someone that's known. So I did another interview the other day, and they asked how bad it was, and I pulled out my phone, and I don't know what it's like in eastern states, but in South Australia, you can look at the district court list, and there's the person's name and what they've been charged with.
Yep.
That day alone, there was 42 cases in the district court, and 12 of them were related to child abuse. That's 30% of actions that day were about this, and it's not about don't run away from this. It's most of the time it's someone that's mother, father, uncle, grandparent that they keep secret. And when it's a family issue like that, most of the time they only get conviction is when they're actually caught in the act.
Yeah.
And that's when I've represented a lot of people under 18 that come forward, and that's because it's actually been witnessed. People that didn't witness, they're the ones that more likely come forward in the 50s and 50, 60 years old because they don't
That
want.
makes sense.
I don't want mum to know, don't want dad to know. But I found most people report when they actually have children of their own, because then they go, oh, I can't imagine anyone doing this to my child.
They realise how innocent they were at that age when that
Exactly.
was happening to them. Yeah, that makes sense. But the fact that you check a court list and there's 12 accused people appearing at court, I suppose the other aspect of it that keeps it under the cover is the fact that it's not reported widely in the media because there's all these media restrictions, and so it sort of works as a benefit for the offenders.
And that's one thing. There was a lot of parties pushing for a national sex registry, and I mean I'm all for it. But in South Australia, it's not as bad as eastern states. But in the eastern states, a lot of people, they need actually approval from the courts to come forward and be identified. Where in South Australia, a person just signs a piece of paper for a journal and says, I consent to coming out.
Yeah.
And I mean, the stats are that it's most likely happened to someone they know, but it shouldn't be on the victim survivor to say you have to be quiet, otherwise you get arrested. If they want to come out and identify the person, why shouldn't they? And the one reason that government agencies have said they're not for it is because they're worried about people going out and
Vigilante.
bashing it. But you think with vigilantes, if someone abused your child, the parents would be the first ones that would want to attack them. And how often do you see someone in court getting their head kicked in by a parent for this happen? It never happens.
That's a valid point, because we got to protect the offender because of the vigilante, but the people that would go after the offender would be people that know the victim. Yeah.
I've seen it once in my lifetime. I represented a girl that when the offender was leaving the courtroom, the mother was just punching this guy in the back of the head.
Yeah.
And, I mean, he wasn't hurt at all, but...
That's the only time you've
yeah,
seen
but he was out there and he abused something like 20 independent girls in childcare, and only 2 got convictions of that. And, I mean, he's still out and about. Nothing's happened to him. He hasn't been hurt. He hasn't gone to hospital for this thing. But people need to know if there's a predator living around them. And the registry should... Or you look in America, people put on the sex offender registry right away, and it's to warn the community to stay away from this person. And if people are worried about getting put on the list, there's only one way not to be on there, and that's to not sexually offend.
Which shouldn't be that hard. Do you think that's having a positive impact?
Yes, I do, because people don't want to go on that. People do not want to be seen as a registered sex offender. It can impact jobs. It can impact where you live, what you can and can't do. It's the same as in South Australia at the moment, that we have people that are convicted of child sex matters, and they go to tribunals and try and get their working with children certificates reinstated.
Yeah,
and you think
that doesn't make sense.
It doesn't. But when you're in America, if you're labelled that, you do not walk away from that.
So who has access to that in America? Everyone.
I believe so. I think there's you can actually look at your neighbourhood. You type in your postcode, and you can actually see how many are within a mile, within 2 miles.
Yeah.
And it's not like saying, Bob Smith or Rolf Harris lives at this. You can say Rolf Harris now because he's dead, but Rolf Harris lives at this street, so stay away from it. It's not that. It's simply saying, stay 200 metres away from this bus stop, or and it's just a warning for parents. If your kid's out there riding bikes to school, and there's 8 sex offenders within a mile radius, you'd be like, hey, maybe I'll drop them off or go this way. But it's definitely to show that you need to protect children, and it's not in the community's best interest to have sex offenders out there and living close to schools and playgrounds. And
I've always thought that with the high rate of divorces and separated families, blended families, and all that it would be really handy when someone's come into someone's life and got access to the kids, that if their history could be known. And it might be a case if I started the relationship and I give the person permission, yes, you can check on the registry. I sign a form, an access form, and that person can look and go, okay, so you haven't been convicted. It's complicated. It might give you, maybe you haven't been convicted and you are a sex offender. So there's ways. Anything that can help to protect kids has to be a good thing.
Exactly, and it's just a matter to make sure that your children are safe. I mean, you teach your kids to look both ways to cross the road and about stranger danger and everything like that. But it's you're more statistically likely to be abused by someone in the family than a stranger. I think it's either 92 or 93% of abuse occurs
Yeah.
by someone that's known. So it's very rare it happens when it's complete
So
stranger.
that stranger danger campaign that we were all part of, it might have given false security.
It is. I mean, my mum, when I was younger, she said never get into a stranger's car and take lollies. But me at 3 a.m. leaving town, if an Uber pulls up with a Mentos in the back, I'm eating it. So, but it's that falls by the wayside. But when it's something like this, where it's a high risk and when it can have such severe impact, and I mean, just for instance, I've had a client that she came out recently about it, and as soon as she disclosed it, her parents both, like a red light just went off. Oh my God, that's why your personality changed. We thought something happened, and again, that was a person that was known around the area that was abusing children. If they had known that this offender was living in close proximity to them, they would never have let their daughter go to their house.
It's interesting, like people do have a second, like a sense that there's something wrong going on. I had someone, friend of a friend, without naming it, but child had been abused by someone. They came to get advice from me away from work, and I gave them certain advice, and I told some other people who this person was, and sometimes I didn't even have to get the name out. I said, this child has, and don't tell me it's such and such. And people sort of knew. It was a community, and people knew that this person was someone that couldn't be trusted.
Yeah.
Just spent too much time or something about that person.
There's a school in South Australia. I'm actually on first name basis with the principal because I've sued the school that many times because of one certain teacher, and he was known for doing it. There was talks about the school about him being a creep for 30 years.
Yeah.
The school kept employing him. The school had complaints about him and did nothing about it because they said, that doesn't sound like him. But it's one might be a fluke, but 3 or 4 times is definitely a pattern. And that's not 3 or 4 times by people. That's 3 or 4 times, in the span of 10, 15 years where students come and go. And and that's the thing about the registry, is to actually warn people that there's people like this out there. And if there's no registry and someone abuses a child and pleads down to make it go away to inappropriate touching or something like that, then why should they be protected? And when the survivors can't even come out and say, hey, no, this was me, this happened to me.
Yeah, well, you got no argument on this side. We'll talk about the super and all the other thoughts on child sexual abuse, but how did you get into law? Why did you get into law? I just want to understand where you're coming from.
I hated being an accountant.
Come on, don't give accountants a bad rap.
I think they do that themselves, but no, I was sick for a lot of high school, so I missed a lot of time, and I got into commerce and started doing that, and then all my teachers said, hey, UniSA is starting a law degree next year. You should really do that.
Yeah.
And I was on the fence until one night when I was working as an auditor, so I mean, I don't have the personality for an auditor, thank God, but I was working at that, and one guy was talking about a new tax break he was so excited to read, and I just went, I'm out. I'm out.
This is the end of my.
I went back to work in a bottle shop and did law and just enjoyed doing it. I got picked up by a criminal firm through uni, and I just had fun with it. Like, I was always the first one in the pub, but I was always the one that, it was my second shot at a career. So I'd go to the library on weekends. I'd really wanted to make a crack at this because I saw how hard it was for people to get law jobs, and my driving factor was I don't want to go back to doing a job that I hate.
Yeah.
So I just worked my ass off, and I was the first ever law graduate out of UniSA, and then started practicing in 2011, and basically haven't looked back.
And it's not an easy qualification to obtain either.
I think it's a new arts degree, a law degree. I think everyone just wants to do a law degree and wear their oversized Gucci sunglasses and say they're a lawyer. So
you can be pretty cool pretending you're a lawyer. But to make it in law, you have got to work very hard. That's my observations of it. You need to be passionate about it. You can't be half-hearted. You probably could, but you're not going to be good at what your job is.
I think being a good lawyer is the stuff that you can't teach. So I've got a team now of juniors under me, and when I look for resumes, I don't care if you've got straight high distinctions. I don't care this. If you've worked in hospitality or retail throughout your uni degree it shows that you know how to talk to people, and especially this kind of area. If you can't talk to anyone, I mean, what's the point? Anyone can go to court and argue something, but I don't think many people who've done a law degree can actually sit down with someone that's going through one of the worst times in their life and actually have a chat with them and be the same as a
Yeah.
police officer. You know, how many times would you see other people that couldn't even form a conversation with someone?
Well, I know I've had the opportunity on a number of occasions to lecture at universities to law students, and I always make the point that you've got to bring humanity into law to be a good lawyer. And I think what you're talking about, communication, is part of that. You need that empathy and understanding to really understand that law impacts on people's lives.
Well, it's not like you work in a chocolate shop. People don't come there when they want something. They go to a lawyer when it's something bad's happened to them.
Yeah.
It's it's not a pleasant experience to, I mean, go through a litigation action. Most people don't wake up in the morning and go, I can't wait to see my lawyer today. But it's really just, you're effectively a problem solver. And there's some lawyers out there that are in the business of selling legal advice, which I hate. I'm in the business of providing a service. So,
Yeah.
so I said before, I tell people I can make me money or you money. And, I've made my reputation telling exactly how it is. I had some fraud clients a while ago that lost everything and had to photocopy 1,000 pages. And I said, hey, we charge $1 a page. There's an Officeworks around the corner. There's a centre page. Here's USB. Go down there.
Yeah, and that's, I think, why some lawyers get a bad rap with the costings of it. I remember I was caught up in a civil matter and had to do an affidavit. I did the affidavit. I was quite, that's what I do in policing. It wasn't that hard for me to do the affidavit. Sent it to the lawyer. The lawyer changed it all round, and where the changes were, it was wrong. So then had to pick the phone up. Someone at work was baiting me, going, ring him up, tell him it's wrong. So I did, but then he charged me for telling him it was wrong.
My dad left when I was very young, and
Yeah.
my mum was still legally married to him. And so when I became a lawyer, I said, time to divorce him. And I actually wrote my mum's affidavit for her, and her lawyer charged her $4,000 for drafting it. And I called him up and I said, what happened? Oh, we had to draft the affidavit. I'm like, I drafted it.
Yeah.
And so I think that's, family lawyers are a different kettle of fish, but we'll just let that one slide.
We'll let that one just slip through. We're just talking generally. But, I understand where you're coming from. But that might be part of where people get the bad rap, or lawyers get the bad rap.
Oh, you're a cop. You should love lawyers, shouldn't you?
I spent... it's a love-hate relationship. It is quite interesting with lawyers. I hate walking into the court. The court was always, that's the culmination. You might be working on an investigation for years. I worked on for decades, and you're walking in the court and the culmination of all the hard work is coming here. The good lawyers that I dealt with were the ones that were receptive to communicating, and it's interesting you say communicating. I would put some murder briefs together and there'd be an arrogance. I called it intellectual arrogance. I said that at a parliamentary inquiry once, the Barraville parliamentary inquiry. They said, why do you think legal people haven't consulted with you on what you've said here? And I just came up with the term intellectual arrogance, and it was almost like, what could a cop pass on? But then, that's talking the negative side of it, then some of the most, what I consider the best legal minds in the criminal world that I was working in, legal minds of barristers and solicitors, were the ones that were very engaging with the witnesses, with the police, taking on all the information, and then they get up and present the information at court. And it always amazes me, and I see why they're put there on a pedestal, because it's brilliant in the way they present so clearly and concisely the points they're trying to get across.
And people don't realise it's generally on the criminal side, it's a team thing. It's police relied on the lawyers to actually make sure that the conviction's done properly. Where I haven't done crime in 11, 12 years,
Yeah.
and I kind of got a bit ticked off as seeing people they're on camera doing something, and it's clear as them they're wearing the same hoodie as there are in court sitting next to me, and suspended sentence. And I think one once there was a poor 18-year-old, he was pizza delivery driver, and this one idiot decided to go and call a pizza and then go rob him.
Yeah.
And so the guy that robbed him, I'm on drugs, I'm so sorry, suspended sentence. The kid that he robbed was a month out from Year 12 exams, failed every exam, couldn't get to university, changed his life. And I'm sitting there going, how is this thing?
Equate? Yeah.
I guess that's my skewed view of it. I don't do crime because I I simply look at it, how is this harsh sentence, or how is this unjust sentence that? And most of the time, they're like that guy didn't have any money to his name, so this poor 18-year-old kid couldn't sue him for it, and
Yeah.
he got a tiny victims of crime payout. But I mean, he's ruined year 12 and his university studies because of this one guy who just wanted $50 from a pizza for a hit.
It's definitely not perfect, the criminal courts. I say, and just as I get older and a little bit wiser, hopefully I look at it, and the courts are as good as the information that's put before them. I think that's something that we've got to accept. Our system's not perfect, but in scale, compared to other areas or other jurisdictions, it's pretty good. But with the courts, the way it's presented, like I'm talking criminal courts here, quite often the victims are under this misguided belief. They come to the police. They've had their house broken into. They've lost house that wasn't insured. They've lost $20,000 worth of stuff, and I've caught the local idiot that's broken into the place. And we go to court and they're convicted, and then going, well, how do I get my money back? Well, he's unemployed. He's never worked a day in his life, and he's in jail now for 12 months. There's no money there. What's your advice on that? Can you just explain? Because I think people do have the misconception that if they go to the police will arrest the person and everything will be sorted out.
Yeah, and the hard thing is with a break-in, unless you have insurance, there's not much you can do. And even if you were to try to sue this offender, I mean, if they're a man of stone, or there's nothing you can do. And that's why, someone getting a suspended sentence is hardly punishment. I mean, in South Australia, there's a $390 million victims of crime fund, and it only relates to people that have a personal injury from a conviction, but it's skewed. So before 1970, it's capped at $1,000, and I think it's up to $100,000 now. But to get the statutory maximum, you have to basically not work for years and suffer massive losses. But with the amount of money that's in that pot, surely they could issue fines for these people that cause this damage, or even back end it. So if you want to have your non-parole period, if you want to get out, you have to make ways to actually
pay amends back to.
Because a lot of people now, when they get legal aid in South Australia, it's a $30 payment a contribution that they pay towards it, and $30 to some people, whatever. Here you go, here's $30. I'll go and steal another carton of beer, and I've saved myself $8. So, I mean, the justice issue is someone that breaks into a house and gets a suspended sentence, and someone has to go and go through Facebook Marketplace and find everything they've stolen, and it's just unfair from that standpoint. But I mean, it's something that you can't really convict out of, this problem, but it's something there that you should be able to have some form of recourse if you suffer financial losses because of a crime against someone committing.
Yeah, I don't think anyone could really argue that it's not a perfect world. It would be great if we could get, as you said, the stone man. You can't get blood out of a stone. So let's talk about child sexual abuse. And out of all the crimes, like my expertise or my area that I concentrated on was homicide, obviously. And I worked in armed hold-up squad. I did fraudsters, sex offenders, or whatever. What sets child sex offenders apart in your mind? Because you've seen a lot of them now. You've been working in law 12 years, 11 years, advocating for survivors or victims of child sexual assault. So you've seen a lot of the offenders. What's your take on them?
I won't go into my real R-rated take of them, but I think the big thing is I've been part of the fight game for a long time, so you see a lot of guys in there that, bikies and standover men and whatnot.
And just to clarify that, when we talk about the fight game, he's not talking about the courts. There is a lot of fights in courts. This is martial arts and UFC, that type, mixed martial arts. Yeah.
So if you talk to anyone, if their friends drink drive, you'd sit down and have a beer with your mate that's drink driving. If your mate gets in a punch on the fight, you'd probably have a chat with them and say, that's stupid, what do you do? I don't know anyone that would want to sit down with a child sex offender. It's the lowest of the low. I think it was in Con Air that John Malkovich said that they're like the equivalent of the stuff on the bottom of your shoe or the white stuff that goes in your lips when you're thirsty. They mean nothing. Yeah. And that's because, you don't mess with kids. There's a reason why they're put in protective custody in jails, because everyone wants to harm them. There's no redeeming qualities about a person that abuses a child. Absolutely none. There's no justification. There's no reason for it. and they're quite frankly just the lowest of the low criminals out there. I think, like I said before, when people murder, sometimes there is a legal reason for it. Someone was trying to kill me, so I stabbed him, and
Some mitigating circumstances
exactly.
that
But there's
might
no
play in the part.
There's no mitigating. There's no way you can commit something against a child because a child cannot consent to this. And I think the big thing with child sex offenders is it's the narcissistic personality where they want to try and control. And
Yeah, I've heard you say that. Just break that down.
a lot of the time it's how could she do this to me? Why is she
What
going
the
to
offenders? How could the victim
yeah.
do this to me, a child?
Yeah, how could they do this to me? I bought them lollies, I did this, or the one that I hate the most is she came on to me. She's 7.
Yeah.
So it's I don't know why these people are built that way, but it's something that is just reprehensible. There's no amount of punishment that you can give to these offenders for these sorts of thing, and I just don't know why you'd harm a child. I see why people drink and drive. I see why people speed. I just don't see how anyone can harm a child.
Well, I suppose in the vein of narcissists, it's for their own sexual gratification.
It is.
Which is, so you're going to destroy this person's life, this child's life, this innocent child, for your own sexual gratification.
And it's normally just not someone off the street that kidnaps someone. It's normally a level of grooming. If it's a scout leader, a priest, a coach, or an uncle that just desperately wants your kid to come over the house all the time. It's a level of grooming, and then after it happens, it's a level of, you better not tell anyone, I might go to jail, you might go to jail, this is our secret. And it's just the control leads up to the actual act, and then the control happens afterwards. I've had people that said, if you tell anyone about this, I'll abuse your brother.
Yeah.
And so...
Yeah. Well, that's the type of threats they're making to the victim that...
And it's rife at the moment. It's COVID was quite bad for it because people weren't able to escape, they weren't able to go to school. But the one thing that happened most during COVID was people would be paying individuals over Skype to abuse children in Southeast Asia.
Yeah.
And that went through the roof. And you think, how could someone sit back and do that?
It's disgraceful, isn't it? There is no excuse for it.
And the thing is, you see these people on news that have these images. You never see someone arrested for 5 images or 10 images. It's usually hard drive after hard drive or terabytes, and it's hundreds and hundreds of thousands of images. And you think, how could it get that far?
You're working in the area. Do you think it's increased?
Massively. There was a study in New South Wales early this year that showed that in the past 10 years, these crimes have gone up 4.5% per year. That's the physical crimes. The ones overseas have absolutely skyrocketed because the ease of access now, and also the cost of storage. Like I remember when I was younger, a USB cost about $30 or $40 to get a very miniature storage USB. And now people buy terabytes from JB Hi-Fi.
Don't even think about it, do you?
Yeah, and the people are filling these up. So what was happening during COVID was, because a lot of these sick individuals that couldn't travel to Southeast Asia to go on their abuse holidays, they would just find people and pay them online to abuse people or abuse young children over Skype. Yeah. And I met with the Department for Home Affairs, which I thought that was an American thing. I had no idea it was a Australian thing. I just thought it was like an Independence Day movie where they had those people doing that. But
saving the world.
Yeah, they heard about me in the super change, and they called up and they said, we got this great idea. We want to do this international fund for victims of abuse overseas, and we want to set up a $90 million account where people who abuse overseas can sue and get justice. So, okay, 2 problems with that. 1, who pays for it? Oh, the taxpayer. Why?
Yeah.
And second one, how can you find a 3-year-old in a Southeast Asian community? I said it doesn't work, does it? And so I think I ruined a government organisation's 6-month research paper into this in 2 questions. But yeah, it went through the roof because people would come, and again, over Skype, there's no risk of getting caught because people would use that and they'd simply pay people in cryptocurrency, and it wasn't traceable.
Not being able to track it.
Yeah, and they wouldn't record it because they didn't want to, run the risk of incriminating themselves. So they just kept live streaming and telling people exactly what they wanted to do. And again, it's not a normal thing to do that.
It's not a normal thing, and I suppose people smarter than I would work out what's driving them. But sexually motivated crimes are it's a strong area of motivation. I'd learnt that in homicide, like a sex drive is a strong motivation, and so they're capable of.
We look at countries, I think it's Denmark, where they have full frontal nudity on TV most
Yeah.
nights, and they have some of the lowest rates of abuse in the world because it's, instead of going to abuse someone, they just wait for the 7 o'clock movie. But it's just astronomical, the amount of material that people have. Like I said before, it's not 1 or 2 photos; it's millions and videos. And there was a chiropractor in Adelaide that he was caught a while ago. He always told people to go and get an X-ray before they went in. He had something like 350 different girls that he had separate files saved, and again he blamed it on a sex addiction. It's like, no, this is, you're recording a 4-year-old in a chiropractor. That's not a sex addiction. You can't blame an addiction on something like that. You're doing it for your own sexual gratification.
No, I don't think they can hide behind that. Well, the grooming side of it, breaking it down, the grooming side is so manipulative too, isn't it? Like you're planning the crime. It's not like this. We've all made bad decisions in our lives, split-second decisions, and I've hit that person or done something stupid. But they are planning. They're creating opportunities. That's what I found with pedophiles that I was investigating, that they create an environment where they had plenty of options, and they'd build trust. They'd build trust. Oh yes, you can leave your child here. I'll look after him. That type of thing.
I had one guy once that he would always get his neighbours to come over and use his pool.
Yeah.
And he'd always say, oh, no, just go and get changed in the laundry every time. Cameras in the laundry everywhere. And
Really?
he was at the point where he's like, no, come on, over you come, and got really pushy of it. And one of them just saw a red flashing light one day and went, oh, hang on, this isn't
What's
here.
going on?
I mean, we're not trying to say that everyone who is nice to your child is an offender, but it's something that you definitely need to look for signs, or if all of a sudden your kid goes, I don't want to go there. I don't want to go there. Why not? Don't want to talk about it. That's one of the red flags that should pop up and think, hang on. They used to love going to this guy's house every weekend, and all of a sudden, flick of the switch and no more.
They're the things you should look out for.
Yeah.
Right. With the manipulation after it too. Like again, when does the crime stop? They just continue.
I think Russell Manser, he actually made a really good point a while ago. He said that people...
just for people that don't know, Russell he was a guest on the podcast. He served a fair bit of time in prison, but he was abused as a child and has come out and now set up an organisation called Voice of a Survivor.
Yeah.
So that's who we're talking about.
And he simply said that people that keep distributing this information or these photographs should be charged with accessory after the fact, because they keep prolonging this. But it's the control thing is, if there's images, people, the hardest thing is, how many people have gotten this. But the control thing afterwards, don't you dare tell anyone, you'll go to jail, or I'll hurt your sister, I'll hurt your brother, I won't buy you toys anymore. If there's a child that escapes an abusive relationship at home and someone's abusing them, most of the time, but he buys me lollies, yet I get belted at home, so I might as well just go to this guy. And but yeah, just the control afterwards is just the manipulation to say, don't come out about this and keep going. And I mean, what you're finding in this day and age now is a lot of the abuse happens over Snapchat, where people actually say, I'm going to meet you here, and and a lot of the Snapchat images almost disappear right away. I think there's ways police that can actually track them back, but people think that they've found ways to hide this. But as we see, information online doesn't go away that easily. The first thing people would do when they find children is, one of the big thing is online games, where they'd, not, add me on Facebook where you can see everything, add me on Snapchat, this is my name. And with Snapchat, you send photos, they delete, but one of the features is you can tag on a map and you can actually find where someone is on Snapchat within 30 centimetres of where they're sitting right away. So what people are actually saying is, add me on this. What are you doing today? You at school? No, what do your parents do? They're at work today. So you're home today?
Yeah.
And then zoom in on Snapchat and they can go to their house right away. And
it's scary, isn't
it? Exactly. That's technology. And people are using technology as a sword and a shield these days, where they're using it to try to protect children from abuse. But it's actually, the amount of ways available for offenders to find children is is ridiculous. And it's either, they can do it subliminally without knowing it, or children can say, oh, come here and, this is my address. But, a 35-year-old shouldn't be playing a children's online game with a child.
Madeline made the point in the Predatory podcast that, you got to look at someone if they're hanging out with kids online. Like, I'm an adult, you're an adult, I've got no interest other than if they were my own kids or that, to talk to them on social media. So any adult that's in, putting themselves in the social media with kids, something's not quite right.
I know, it's ridiculous, like, especially playing like online games with kids. Like, I'm not a video game guy. I was always the one to go outside and, play in the dirt and, hurt myself and try and make an excuse to my mum why I didn't come home before the lights came on. But, I played Mario Kart with my nephew at Christmas one year, and I don't play video games, but I can guarantee you I belted him at Mario Kart because it's what I did when I was young. And that's when you could play video games by yourself. You didn't have this headphone with someone from all over the world that you're playing with it. And there's no age restrictions in these games. If people get the hold of it, they can talk to whoever they want, and the amount of grooming you can be online.
It broadens the opportunities for grooming, doesn't it? It certainly spreads it out.
It is, and again, people aren't getting real punishment for this, so they're like, well, what could happen?
Yeah.
But now I think the authorities know how to actually infiltrate Snapchat and find these offenders and can actually find what's happening. But it's just another tool that people are using. And again, Snapchat, you can add someone without a picture and you can pretend to be something that you're not, where on Facebook you have to go to a lot more lengths to actually set up a fake profile.
Yeah, and like with law enforcement, I know they're always one step ahead. They're always what you think is safe, and we've seen a few of those play out in public with the Anom sting setting up that, which I thought was some great bit of police work.
I thought it was, what a lot guys putting in writing about plans to distribute drugs and admitting to crimes on an app which they thought was encrypted, but it was actually
the police introduced. When I heard about it, I wanted to be a policeman again. I was kicking myself. Why I hadn't thought of that. It seemed like such a simple plan, but a clever plan, and full credit to them.
But that's what, like, say with the dark web, with child exploitation material, I don't know any normal guy that would know how to get on the dark web.
No,
I can Control-Alt-Delete like a champion when my computer busts or unplug it, but apart from that, I don't know what to do. And when there's people going to the depths of the internet to find stuff like that, you got to think right away, there's something wrong with this guy.
Yeah. Well, they're highly motivated. That's the other thing with pedophiles. Like, people don't realise how motivated they are. That the fact that they set up this persona so they can get access to the children. You see it in the careers they choose, or whether it's sports coaches or whatever. These people have gone into that area so they can prey on children.
And it's a sick drug. Like, they just need their next hit, and they don't care at the cost of it. Like, there's no consideration of any human impact about this. It's someone's sick sexual gratification, and they're abusing someone simply for that.
Yeah.
Like, that's all it is. It's a crime of greed and selfishness. It's not, I don't have a loaf of bread for my family this week because they're choosing to go and abuse a child for their own gain. And that's why, if you look at people doing it now, there was the Collingwood Cheer Squad leader that he raped a child and got a 12-month suspended sentence. And that's why a lot of people think, what's even worthwhile?
I don't, and I made it my business not to comment on sentencing at courts when I was a police officer, because you're personally involved. If you've been in the investigation, and you know the victims, and you think, okay, well, the courts are looking at it objectively, but I don't see how they can.
But what about your thoughts at the pub afterwards?
Yeah, well, that's fuck it. You should have got more, or
Exactly.
This is ridiculous. Yep.
And people I get judgments for, and like when it's against an individual, I tell people right off the bat, look, if he's only got a house, only sue him for what the house is worth, because there's no point putting
that's a good point.
a high number on it. Because I see a lot of lawyers, they say, oh, we'll sue this guy for $2 million, and the file comes to me after they get jacked their last lawyer, say, what does he have? Oh, he has a $500,000 house with a $10,000 mortgage.
Yeah.
Why are you suing him for $2 million? They're just going to do it. But when you get to the point where it's against the state or against the church, where there's got a large sums of money there, you tend to look at the judgment and go, oh, they should have offered him more here, but then you don't want to appeal. It's just there's no point for your client. It's not in their best interest. You appeal if you're talking about $1 million difference, but if it's 100 grand more than what you think, you tell your client right away, look, it's going to cost you 80 grand to appeal it. What's the point? But you're seeing these big insurance companies right away that, as soon as a church is sued, they get QCs involved, they try and deep pocket people. Now what they're doing in the eastern states, they're trying to get permanent stays and all these actions to try to...
just to explain, I know the terminology, but deep pocketing.
Deep pocketing is... Yeah, we will take every legal avenue to try and unnecessarily prolong this action.
War through attrition.
Yeah, to scare you into judgment. And whenever someone tries that with me, I just laugh and say, I'm doing this no win, no fee. If you guys want a deep pocket, my guy's got nothing.
Yeah.
Like, it's not going to work out for you. And plus, the court will look at that, and when it gets to a trial stage, the court does look at that and go, right, well, the conduct of the respondent in this has been just ridiculous. They've raised all these untenable positions, and usually that in itself is an aggravating factor in damages. But with these churches, a lot of the time they know that, this person is, comes from because of the offending, they've had a rough background and they stole a chocolate bar 20 years ago, and that shows they're dishonest. It's like, no.
Yeah.
What's more dishonest, a person stealing a chocolate bar or a church covering up abuse over 30 years?
How do you think the best way to deter it? Is it harder punishment, like we've talked on punishment, sentencing? Do you think that will deter it?
Yes and no. I think with offenders, they're usually put right into the police, or sorry, the jails that are the country clubs, where it's all protective custody, all amongst themselves. But I've got one guy at the moment, we've just sued him, and he's got $750,000 in super, and we got a freezing order after he sold his house. Under freezing orders, you're entitled to about $500 a week daily living expenses.
Yeah.
He's spending $500 a week in jail on chocolate bars and everything, and so he can burn 260 grand legally in his time in jail. And then when he gets out, he comes back to his super, and you see the rate of reoffending against these people. It's quite high, and you think, well, if they're getting 3 months in jail for this, they come out at the other end. And even home detention, everyone through COVID did home detention. Home detention is effectively you stay at home, you go out for the necessities only. You sit at home, watch Netflix, and go to the shops.
You can still live a life.
Exactly. Yeah. So custodial sentences, I think people see it on the news and go, oh, well, I'm not going to get caught, and if I do, they'll negotiate my 500 counts down to one of unlawful touching. But then if you start going, hey, you actually can lose your house, your life savings, and everything you worked for, that's when people might stop and think. Because if people turn around and say, I have no money, if you've worked since 1985, guess what? You have super.
Because 1985 was when super became compulsory.
Correct.
So everyone that's been working since then.
And so that's when you think, well, if you really want to deter this from happening, start giving fines. Like most people who have good driving records, when you get a speeding fine, you don't care about the points. The points are just this imaginary thing that's there if you're a terrible driver. People care about getting a $500 fine for this. That's when they go, oh, I'm not going to speed again because it cost me $600. And I hate using that example, but if you run the risk of I could lose everything I've ever worked for if I engage in this act, that's when people might turn around and go, oh, maybe I won't do this.
It has to play on their minds. We'll take a break now, Andrew, and when we come back, I want to really break it down how you think this can work. The super sacrificing the super if they're being caught, and a few other things, but. I think you got an interesting take on the law, and I've always looked at it from a criminal point of view. But you're looking at from the advocacy, looking after the victims and retribution, financial retribution, if that's required.
And I mean, the big thing with that is that the suffering doesn't stop when someone's found guilty.
Yeah,
the suffering in these sorts of things is a lifetime, and that's when someone getting a suspended sentence for 12 months is not going to do anything for the victim survivor.
Doesn't help or give closure. Okay, we'll be back soon.